A Canadian company, Hyperstealth Biotechnology Corporation, has been granted patents for a new laser technology that should be able to defeat most forms of stealth for aircraft, vehicles, camouflage netting, ships, and submerged submarines. Even spacecraft like the U.S. unmanned X-37B, which conduct classified missions for hundreds of days in space, can change its orbit to avoid normal tracking by adversaries, could be detectable by this technology. Hyperstealth's patented optical lens configuration can split any laser into millions of smaller lasers, allowing for ultra-high-definition LiDAR, which are lasers that behave like radar. Hyperstealth has filed this laser-splitting patent application in over 50 countries, and the patent has been granted or approved in 3 countries so far. 40 claims were granted in South Africa, 32 claims were granted in China, and 16 claims were recently approved in Israel, with divisional applications anticipated. The technology has potential air power applications such as ISR, strike, and control of the air, as well as unprecedented battlespace awareness with granular levels of detail. ISR is the acronym for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Combining Hyperstealth's tech with LiDAR provides the ability to detect and track airborne assets like hypersonic missiles or conventional and stealth aircraft from long distances. The U.S. military are apparently trying to find countermeasures by this detection method by testing new surface coatings on the F-22 Raptor, the F-35 Lightning II, and the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighters, which have recently been seen in flight tests with a new mirror-like finish that become clear and non-reflective at certain angles. Coincidentally, these tests occurred after Hyperstealth's president and CEO, Guy Kramer, the inventor of these technologies, demonstrated that his light-bending, invisibility material could not be detected with lasers, nor the target behind it. Hyperstealth's light-bending material has been filed in over 50 countries, with patents being granted in South Africa and China, and approved but not yet granted in the Philippines and Israel. In 2022, SOFWorks, the civilian arm of U.S. Special Operations Command located in Tampa, requested 2 versions of Hyperstealth's prototype invisibility shields, which they now have permanently on hand as a technology demonstrator for Special Operations personnel to review. Kramer points out that the properties of the new stealth fighter coating appears to have the same properties of the lenticular lenses he uses as the basis for his patents, as shown in this demonstration for his solar amplifier patent, which has been granted in Canada, the United States, and approved in Japan. Even if this proves to be effective, the turbulence wake created by these fighter jets and any other conventional aircraft can remain unseen to the naked eye up to 8 miles behind the aircraft, but they are detectable by coherent Doppler LiDAR. Jet engine exhaust emissions and contrails can last for minutes or hours are also detectable by LiDAR, and 1 or more of these can act as breadcrumb trails to locate the source. Chinese researchers released a shocking paper in 2020 demonstrating that their simulations showed that a submerged submarine even at 120 meters or nearly 400 feet in depth could be tracked by their surface wake, and those waves within the wake could extrapolate into speed, direction, and depth. The Chinese researchers point out the lasers used in LiDAR are not adequate for this wake detection, as LiDAR images are severely distorted by sea waves. They are referring to red or infrared lasers that cannot penetrate the surface of the ocean. Green lasers are used by bathymetric LiDAR to get past the surface and see up to 45 meters in depth. The Chinese dismissed typical LiDAR systems due to distortion by the sea waves. However, Hyperstealth's LiDAR cone is not a typical LiDAR, as it can provide over 2 trillion pulses per second, which is 200,000 times faster than the current fastest LiDAR. This should easily compensate for that issue and provide the highest resolution over the other technologies discussed by the Chinese. This high resolution is required to detect these submarine wakes at the surface due to their minimal amplitude of the wake, which are faint ripples when compared to those of surface ships. Once the wake is detected by the red lasers from Hyperstealth's LiDAR cone, then the system can lock on to the submarine itself with green lasers if the submarine is near the surface. Ballistic missile submarines and attack submarines need to get close to the surface to periodically use fast communications and reset their navigation systems. Militaries are integrating more powerful lasers into smaller equipment such as vehicles, ships, and helicopters, not for detection, but for new attack weapons to burn through targets. These powerful lasers have larger diameter laser beams at the source, which will counterintuitively create a smaller diameter beam at long range to focus the energy into a smaller area. With hyperstealth's technology, these new lasers should provide higher resolution LiDAR at much greater distances. This means that an aircraft flying at higher altitudes using hyperstealth system could scan many miles of the surface of the ocean a few trillion times a second and detect even the smallest wake at the surface to passively track submerged submarines without their knowledge. Guy Kramer, the inventor of this groundbreaking technology, tried to convince the U.S. military to acquire it and classify it or bury it. Kramer stated, "Prior to our 4 patents being published, I asked the U.S. military to consider classifying both our invisibility material and the laser splitter. As a Canadian citizen, and Hyperstealth being a Canadian company, the U.S. has no jurisdiction over this technology, and the Canadian government had declined to classify it." A retired Canadian brigadier general and myself tried nearly 10 different times over a couple of years to get Canada to reconsider their decision without success. My shareholders had also forced me to apply for patents to secure the intellectual property, and this started the clock ticking as the applications would eventually have to be published. When Canada declined our repeated requests, I then approached the U.S. military with the hope they could find a way to secure the technology before the patents were released to allow them to cancel the patents before they were published to avoid any disclosure. I met personally with the commanding general of MARSOC, which is the U.S. Marine Forces Special Operations Command, in May 2018, who, upon seeing the invisibility material firsthand, agreed with me that it should be classified. MARSOC then spent 15 months reviewing our technology before the patents were published in August 2019, and even sent a U.S. Army Special Operations representative to our office in Canada to see the technology developments in person. Kramer continued, "I discussed with him that my biggest concern was with the laser splitter being publicly disclosed due to the many potential applications I could foresee with detection and tracking of submerged submarines, underwater mines, Navy special operations divers, and underwater drones up to 45 meters in clear water with green lasers modified with our technology. My other major concern were that all Allied conventional and stealth aircraft and hypersonic missiles could be jeopardized with this detection method if adversaries became aware of how to implement it." Guy states that the U.S. Army Special Operations representative was unable to convince the command to acquire the technologies prior to the publication in August 2019. In retrospect, the U.S. military didn't know at the time that high-power lasers would improve to the extent they have, making our laser-splitting technology viable at the longer ranges I was suggesting to them. And no one knew at the time that the Chinese would discover, a year after our patent published, that submarines could be detected by their surface wake at depths far greater than anyone anticipated, and that our laser splitter using red lasers to bounce off the ocean surface could be used to exploit this massive vulnerability. The job of stealth is to evade detection. Now, the United States' most critical assets under the ocean, on the surface, on land, in the air, and in space, are just a few lasers away from being detected, tracked, and targeted. Conversely, the same is true of using it against adversaries. But the U.S. is so far ahead in so many of these areas. Why risk their advantage? Kramer concluded, "When the patent published, the genie was released out of the bottle and it's not going back in. Stealth was the advantage. This concealment which militaries depend on for so many technologies may just end up being the emperor's new clothes."